Having left Gasanga, Wonhyo walked aimlessly. This was the so-called Georangbangi life. The term Georangbangi is derived from words like gara or gesa, coming from the word for wind. Bangi means a person who serves the pestle god Bangasin, also known as Baga. The terms Bangi or Baga are similar to the word for a scholar, so it is a respectful title. When Hwarangs finished their studies, they became Georangbang and roamed the famous mountains and great rivers. This was intended to find good teachers and friends, observe human nature and customs, cultivate courage and martial arts by encountering wicked people or beasts, nurture their feelings by viewing magnificent natural scenery, and offer prayers at famous sites. The combined purpose was to expand a man's magnanimity and overcome fear. But beyond that, wandering aimlessly was a delightful way for young men to satisfy their adventurous spirit and curiosity. Most famous people in Silla had lived this wandering life in their youth. However, among the wanderers, there were those with other purposes. Some wandered to beg for food because they had none. Some were fleeing after committing crimes in their hometowns. Some were searching for enemies to avenge their parents. And some were thieves disguised as wanderers. Even more surprising wanderers were spies from Goguryeo and Baekje. They disguised themselves as wanderers and traveled throughout Silla to spy on geography, defenses, and the sentiment of the people. Conversely, it was also true that Silla spies went to Goguryeo and Baekje. Even Kim Chun-chu had once sneaked into Goguryeo in his youth, only to be discovered as a Silla man due to his accent. Nevertheless, because Georangbangi were originally cultivating scholars or generals, the people of Silla treated them well. In every village, households with ample means would leave their guest room, sarang, doors open. Whoever came, they would engage them in conversation, and if the person was learned, they treated them as a guest, feeding them, letting them sleep, and even giving them travel money upon departure. Leaving the guest room door open was considered the pride of the house. The guest room existed for the sake of guests. A guest never referred to one's relatives or people one already knew. Knowing only how to treat relatives or acquaintances was considered shameful and low class. Anyone who came to one's gate was a guest. Treating guests in this manner was both a joy of life and a great study for the host. Even a humble traveler brought one or two things to learn or stories to hear. If one met a great figure once among dozens or hundreds, it was a great fortune in one's life. Among such people, there might be those with high moral philosophy, great learning, or those destined to become great ministers or generals. One never knew what great fortune might return in the future from the connection made by hosting them for a night. The host sits in the guest room and looks out at the road ahead. Between the road and the room, there would likely be weeping willows or wild pear trees standing like a screen. People pass through the shade all day long. Nobles riding horses or palanquins pass by, as do poor people pulling ox carts with loads. However, a Georangbang wearing a large bamboo hat, wide-sleeved robes, carrying a bundle loosely, and dragging a staff would also pass by. When such a person passed, the eyes of the host sitting in the room would light up. Surely he is an extraordinary person. Thinking this, he would crane his neck to observe the person's behavior. That traveler would likely stand in the shade of a tree, fanning himself, and look into the village. If he were truly a learned wanderer, he would first examine the layout of the village. He would observe the terrain, how the main dragon is, how the blue dragon and white tiger are, the water outlet, the facing mountain, and the orientation, to predict whether, ere or not, a great figure would be born in this village. The people of this land, who loved mountains, had developed the skill of reading the fortune of the land through the shapes of mountains and water since unknown ancient times. If a long-stretching mountain range soars high and cuts off abruptly, with a large river winding in front and a vast field opening up, this is a so-called heaven-blessed land where millions can prosper for thousands of years. If the sea is near, it is even better, and if the soil color is not black, it is better still. Such sites exist only one or two in a country, but a site suitable for a village follows the same principles, though on a smaller scale. The orientation should be facing south. The northwest should be blocked and the southeast open. Places with granite have good water and delicious crops and fruits. Steep mountains are bad. The foundation must be flat. The soil must be firm yet have water. The water exit should not be visibly open. If the valleys are not unified and are chaotic, the people's minds will not be calm. If mountains outside the layout peak in, people's hearts will be restless. The northeast, north, and northwest are directions for enshrining spirits, and the southwest should not be defiled. These were the methods of viewing village and house sites handed down from ancestors. After the traveler in the shade examined the mountain and water spirits of the village, he would examine the human spirit, Ingi. Ingi refers to the spirit of the people living there. If the roads are wide and the house sites are spacious and sturdy, the human spirit is strong. Even if they are thatched houses, if they look like crab shells, the people living inside are insignificant. Next, he looks at the dogs, chickens, cows, and horses. Dogs, pigs, chickens, cows, horses, and cats are friends who have lived with the people of this land since unknown ancient times. They are friends brought along while migrating from far north of the Asian continent to the south. Dogs were considered creatures of the sun, puppies, pigs and chickens of the moon, cows of the water god, and horses of the sun god again, living together helping each other affectionately. Do, Ge, Geol, Ute, Mo of the Ute game represent the pig, dog, sheep or bird, cow, and horse. Therefore, a village where these animals prosper is a village with vigorous human spirit. Other friends living in the village include crows, magpies, sparrows, snakes, weasels, cats, and rats. Perhaps flies and mosquitoes are ancient hated friends as well. When the traveler sought a place to stay, the chickens would flap their wings to announce the evening, and the crows and magpies would nod their heads in agreement at the sound. At this time, if the maidens or women coming to draw water at the well with gourds and jars were neat in appearance and healthy, and the naked children following them had bright eyes, high nose bridges, and loud cries, this village was surely a prosperous one. If fat calves and foals were shouting and frolicking, it would be a village that would make the traveler stop his steps all the more. In such a village, the water, rice, and soy sauce would be delicious. Surely, there would be no maggots in the soybean paste, and the fire would draw well in the furnace so there would be no smell of burning dog wood. The wine would not be sour and would be the color of a hawk's eye, and the yeast would be clothed in golden color. The traveler would stroll into the village and look for a house with its guest room door open. He would step through the main gate and call out boldly, "Is anyone here?" At this, a boy with his hair in a braid would run out, kneel before the guest, place both hands on the ground and ask, "Where are you from, sir?" "Tell your master that a passing traveler wishes to stay the night and stands before your gate." "If you do not mind a humble room, please enter," the boy would say. Thus the traveler ascends to the guest room. Water for washing the face and feet is provided. While the traveler changes into the clean clothes he carried in his bundle, the host comes out to exchange greetings, and tea or a liquor table is served. During this time, the host and guest examine each other's character. When night falls, stories unfold or music and singing begin. If the host and guest are compatible, the conversation continues uninterrupted until the first rooster crows. This was because the wanderers knew much news of the world and many interesting stories. Keeping the guest room open and treating guests was what this people considered their greatest joy. Living well meant serving well and treating guests well. Whether it was grain or fruit, everything was always divided into 3 vessels, one for the gods, one for guests, and one for the family to eat. Guests were respected next to the gods. They believed that a traveler visiting their home was either a god or a messenger sent by a god. Therefore, from the time the traveler entered until he left, it was like a ritual day for the household. The family changed into new clothes and avoided all impurity. They served all the delicious things in the house and were careful with their words among themselves. They believed that if they spoke ill of the guest or used harsh words, great punishment would fall upon them. Even crying children would stop if told, "The guest has come." Measles was called small guest and smallpox big guest or honorable guest star. This too was thought to be an invisible god coming to stay. "May you stay in peace and leave in peace." This was the wish of the family. The family tried to keep their bodies and minds clean so there would not be a speck of impurity. Married couples not only refrained from sleeping together, but believed that even harboring such thoughts would anger the guest. They were as careful as someone walking while holding a bowl brimming with water. Just as they hung a straw rope, gumjol, to guard the gate, they hung a straw rope in their hearts to guard them. They could not pass indifferently even the sound of rice boiling in the pot, or the way the fire burned in the furnace. A great guest had come to stay with their precious son or daughter. They thought this way, not only about smallpox, but about any disease. They listened to the sounds of magpies and crows with particular attention, trying to find the guest's will in them. The chicken dozed while standing. A weasel slinked across the yard. These things, along with dreams, became materials for divining the guest's will. The old grandmother judged fortune and misfortune based on her many children and long experience, and performed various spiritual rituals. It was the same for living guests. If one treated a guest poorly and sent them away, one never knew when some calamity might strike. However, welcoming guests was not solely out of such fear. It was their nature. Guest, traveler, these were words that gave them great beauty, joy, and infinite interest. Wonhyo had set out as a wanderer into such a world. At his waist he still wore 8 gourds, 4 dippers were attached to his load, and he held one rounded gourd, dwingbak, in his hand. The 8 gourds represented Ga, Na, Da, Ma, Ba, Sa, A, which were the names of the 8 generals, gods, and simultaneously the history of this people's life. They were also the keynote of all music, the octave. Touching an instrument meant doing ganadara. Swaying or strutting meant moving to the rhythm of ganadara, ganadara ma. The 4 dippers on his load were a rice bowl, water bowl, side dish bowl, and soup bowl. Big, small, smaller, and smallest, they nested into one. The rounded gourd in his hand replaced a wooden clapper, moktak. When mealtime came while traveling, Wonhyo followed the Buddha's way of almsgiving. He would enter a village and visit houses indiscriminately, not choosing large houses and not skipping small ones. Clack, 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 he would tap the gourd and chant, Namu Amitabha. If the owner did not come out after 10 calls, he would go to the next house and do the same. In this manner, Wonhyo visited 6 houses. He was thinking of the 6 perfections, paramitas. He would eat what he obtained from circling 6 houses and would not circle more. If he obtained no rice after 6 houses, he decided to starve for that meal. Wonhyo returned to his hometown as he had originally intended and visited the site where he used to live, now a temple, and the graves. It was a return to the home of his heart after leaving 10 years ago. Wonhyo met some people he knew, but they did not recognize him. Having heard that Wonhyo had become famous in the world and the king's teacher, they had no reason to think this beggar was Wonhyo. Moreover, he had let his beard grow wild, so even someone who had seen him a year ago would hardly recognize him. Also, Wonhyo did not want to reveal his appearance to acquaintances, so he wore his bamboo hat low and did not show his face. However, even for a body that had cast off everything, his hometown was affectionate. The house where he grew up and the village were welcome sights. Before the grave of his mother, who died immediately after giving birth to him, Wonhyo could not help but shed tears. The story that she gave birth to him under a chestnut tree on her way back from Sangha Hall at dawn and screened herself with his father's clothes made Wonhyo miss his mother unbearably. From that one fact, Wonhyo could examine her heart as a wife and as a mother. It was a very deep yet very short connection. Wonhyo was the first son and the only son. That mother passed away immediately after giving birth to the son, Wonhyo, whom she had waited for so long. She left the world without even knowing her son's name or nursing him once. Wonhyo visited his mother's grave after dark to avoid people's eyes. Then he called out, "Baba!" It is the Silla word for mother. Wonhyo thought it must be her lingering regret not to have heard her son call her mother. Wonhyo called out countless times, "Baba! Baba!" He wanted to let her hear the sound she had desired to her heart's content. But there was no sound from the grave. It had already been 34 years. After 34 years of death, even the skeleton would barely remain. His mother no longer had ears to hear her son Wonhyo's call. "Mother, where are you now?" Wonhyo looked up at the sky as if trying to see where his mother was. The first autumn stars were twinkling in the sky. "Baba, where are you now?" Wonhyo felt anxious. If he knew where his mother was, he felt he would follow her even to the top of the sky or the bottom of the earth. Wonhyo's birthday was the day his mother died. It was a very sad parting. Mother and son did not know each other's faces or voices, but he felt they would surely recognize each other wherever they met in eternal time, because the connection was so deep and the affection so profound. Because they parted as soon as they met, the affection seemed even deeper. Mother came to this world to give birth to me. As soon as she gave birth to me, she left the world. Mother sacrificed her life to give birth to me. Thinking this, he missed his mother even more and felt pity for her. "Baba, Baba," Wonhyo raised his voice and called a few more times. Wonhyo had no way to imagine the face of the mother he had never seen. He could vaguely recall the faces of his father and grandfather, but there was no way to think of his mother. Wonhyo had a habit of thinking his mother's appearance would be like that of Queen Sungmin when he saw her. Now, before his mother's grave, he thought of Queen Sungmin. Seeing Queen Sungmin and his mother as one, Wonhyo sighed. The world-honored one, Buddha, also lost his mother on the day he was born. I too will be born as the son of this mother in my final life when I attain Buddhahood. Wonhyo thought this way. It seemed there was no other way to repay his mother's grace. Standing before his mother's grave, Wonhyo suddenly thought of Princess Yosok. He wondered if her fate would be like his mother's if she were pregnant with a child. Wonhyo thought he had cut off all human ties since becoming a monk. He thought he had completely severed the chain of reincarnation coming from beginningless time and would never form any ties again. He thought of himself as a bodhisattva who was neither stained nor hindered. He believed he would never form good or bad ties again. However, thinking about it now, Wonhyo had already lost to the karma of many lives. He had formed an unbreakable tie with Princess Yosok, and if she gave birth to a child, it would be an even more unbreakable tie. Wonhyo felt the tangled ropes of karma pulling him. "No hindrance, Mue," Wonhyo snorted at himself. Queen Sungmin, Simsang whose whereabouts were unknown, and Asaga, they were not merely passing breezes. Not to mention Princess Yosok. Though there were differences in depth, they had taken root in Wonhyo's heart and would not fall off. It was not just that they were not forgotten. Their roots touched Wonhyo's blood and marrow. Especially Princess Yosok, with whom he had joined flesh, followed Wonhyo wherever he went. She was like a shadow that could not be detached. Wonhyo realized for the first time from the Princess Yosok incident how terrifying the connection between man and woman was. He had heard and spoken much of the lotus metaphor. It is in the water, but once out, it is dry. But Wonhyo realized his heart was never a lotus. He knew it was a heart like cotton that once wet does not dry easily. When he walked out of the Yosok Palace gate, Wonhyo believed it was like a place where wind had passed, but alas, it was not so. Ah, what is frightening is the power of karma, especially the karma between man and woman. Wonhyo lamented like this on the Sangadang. Even in the place where all desires and memories vanished after fasting for days, the matter of Princess Yosok came alive even more clearly. Wonhyo lamented that this was an unbreakable iron chain that would drag him even to Avicii hell. If not for the terrifying lesson burned by the Princess Yosok affair, Wonhyo might have accepted Asaga's love. Asaga was fresh, innocent, and yet passionate, so the flames of her passion burrowed into Wonhyo's bones. Sometimes Wonhyo's arms wanted to open toward Asaga of their own accord. Wonhyo resented himself and was angry that his mind was not trained. Wonhyo considered himself a practitioner who had left filth, igu. I am not yet a free and unhindered person. I am merely a practitioner trying to peel off layers of grime, little by little, struggling against myself. In theory, I seem to have realized, but my heart does not listen. Wonhyo lamented like this. Wonhyo who does not get wet and does not get stained. He felt that much discipline was needed to become this. Thinking this way, Wonhyo felt his immense pride deflate, realizing he was worth little. Wonhyo looked at his mother's grave again in the darkness. "Mother, this sun does not yet have the power to save you. I have not saved myself, so how can I save others? Mother, this sun is already approaching 40, yet I have not saved myself." Wonhyo stroked the beard growing on his chin. Mother, the world calls this son Great Master Wonhyo, but this son is not yet a person to be a teacher of others. When I visit Mother's grave again, I will surely become a true Great Master Wonhyo. Wonhyo became a young son in heart before his mother. Wonhyo chanted the Nembutsu 1,000 times for his mother and withdrew from the grave. Wonhyo knew that his dejection was due to his broken vows. Since the incident at Yosok Palace, he, who used to be full of spirit like a prince, felt like he had no place to hide his body. Breaking the precepts is like a bird having its wings cut off. Wonhyo lamented to himself. Before breaking the precepts, he was never ashamed wherever he turned or whomever he faced. He could hold his head high toward the sky, and even toward the stars. It seemed that the boundless sentient beings living there all looked up to him and waited for his teaching of salvation. At that time, he could broaden his chest and say, "Yes." But now he was ashamed to look at the stars. The stars had all turned their heads away from him. "We have nothing to hope for from you now." The stars were disappointed. All sentient beings were the same. When his conduct was perfect, light emitted from Wonhyo's body, and all beings found peace in that light. But Wonhyo, who broke the precepts, was no longer light, but a black roof tile. No one cared for it. When Wonhyo stood before his mother's grave, he felt all the ghosts in the mountain pointing fingers and laughing at him. A monk who broke vows, broken vows, he. They said, "How are you different from us? You are the same as us." Ghosts, dogs, snakes, and insects all saw Wonhyo as their own kind. "You are right, I am no different from you, just the same sentient being moved by greed." Wonhyo confessed this, and having no face, had to bow his head. "Return the offerings we gave you until now." One sentient being demanded this of Wonhyo. Wonhyo had received generous treatment from many beings as Great Master Wonhyo. Among them were Queen Sungmun, Simsang, Princess Yosok, Asaga, and other beings whose treatment Wonhyo had received unknowingly. Wonhyo had received all these offerings in vain. He had received offerings he should not have. They offered to him thinking he was a bodhisattva, but what was he? Was he not a monk who broke his vows? Ah, I received treatment I could not accept. That was me stealing the blessings of sentient beings. Wonhyo's heart ached. Wonhyo stopped walking and knelt on the road. "World-honored one, world-honored one." Wonhyo cried, calling the world-honored one countless times. He cried rubbing his face on the ground. Wonhyo, who was spirited, had never cried since he became sensible. He was good at laughing loudly, but he had never cried. Wonhyo poured out tears uncontrollably. When Wonhyo lifted his head, the dawn moon was rising, and owls and scops owls were crying. The autumn night breeze was gentle. The mountain shadows were pitch black, and dew on the grass blades sparkled in the moonlight. Fearing he might meet someone from his hometown, Wonhyo stood up and walked quickly. The sound of autumn insects followed him everywhere. The sound of wild geese, leaving on their night journey following the moonlight, was heard. Geese are Garang sons of the wind. They travel tens of thousands of li north and south in flocks looking for summer, flying with their own wings and feeding with their own beaks. They do not rely on others. That magnificent journey, that spirited nature, Wonhyo envied the geese. Geese obey the guidance of one teacher. They go wherever that teacher leads, and the teacher examines above, below, and all directions to find the right path, a place to rest, and sets the time to leave. At his single honk, his disciples and subordinates abandon their food and wake from their sleep to form a line and set out. Their appearance was the appearance of a bodhisattva. Wonhyo lamented that he was neither one who could lead others, nor one who could follow. World-honored one, world-honored one. Wonhyo called the world-honored one again. Wonhyo had never thought he would practice dutta, ascetic practices. He had thought such things were not the Mahayana Bodhisattva way. He thought the unhindered practice, Muay Heng, was suitable for him. Wherever he went in heaven and earth, whatever he did, there was no obstacle. In my life, I have never deceived or harmed any being, so I have nothing to fear whether I go among hungry ghosts or among tigers and snakes. Since I have no greed for myself, no one will envy or hate me, and since I try to save all beings with compassion, everyone will welcome me and rely on me. Wonhyo had thought of himself this way. Therefore, he thought receiving bows and offerings from beings was to become a field of blessings, punya, etc., for them. But the current Wonhyo was not that Wonhyo. He must not receive offerings from beings by any means. He must cover his body with rags thrown away by beings and fill his stomach with things beings do not value. And since Wonhyo had neither wealth nor dharma to give, he had only the way to help beings with his body and strength. Wonhyo thought this way. Duta practice. Wonhyo felt the gratitude of duta practice keenly. Wonhyo asked if there was anything he could help with in any village he entered. Many people did not trust him well, taking him for a suspicious wanderer, but among them there were those who asked him to carry in grain or pull the plow rope. Then he received rice to eat. That rice was very delicious. It was late September when Wonhyo crossed Dansame Pass. The weather, which had been cool, became hot again, and the evening sun was stinging. Wonhyo crossed the pass and entered a village. Even from the outside, it was a very poor village. About 10 houses were sparsely attached, as if hanging in the mountain valley. The thatch was rotten, causing holes in roofs here and there were few houses covered in gourd vines or pumpkin vines. Weeds grew on the road, and it looked like the road had not been maintained in autumn, so places collapsed by rain remained as they were. It was such a gloomy village. Wonhyo strolled into the village, but there was no sound of chickens or dogs. Is the village empty? Stopping to look, smoke rose from a few houses, and a dog with a sunken belly, mangy and hairless, came from somewhere dragging its tail towards Wonhyo. It stopped abruptly as if surprised to meet a person but did not try to bark. The mangy dog seemed to be the spirit of this village. I should try finding a house. Wonhyo stood before the first house. Wonhyo tapped his gourd moktak, clack, 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 and chanted. Noisy. An old man's voice was heard. It was clearly the voice of a sick person, but there was a shuddering malice in it. Still, Wonhyo continued to chant. Someone beat that monk and chase him away. The old man's voice trembled. A woman ran out saying, Look here, wanderer, making crow noises at a house with sick people. She threw sour rice water she brought in a gourd at Wonhyo's face. Wonhyo did not try to dodge and took the water. Still not going? Ah, he still isn't going. If you don't go, I'll cover you with a dung bucket. The woman threatened. Wonhyo stood before the next house, tapped his moktak, and chanted again. This time, an old man came out leaning on a cane, shaking his head. You have entered the wrong place. This village has the plague, and corpses are rotting in every house. Where is a house to give alms? If you go over that pass there is a big village called Dansam, so go there. I go. Bangara, bangara. The old man said this and went back inside. Still, the old man's words were soft. Wonhyo thought that although he had received poor treatment in many villages, a village like this was a first. At the third house, Wonhyo heard curses from a young woman. Noisy. When people are gathering their last breaths, what alms? Take the plague with you. At the fourth house, no matter how much he tapped the moktak and chanted, there was no sign of anyone. A starving dog lay in the yard, opening its eyes blankly as if too weak to bark, then closing them again. Thinking everyone in this house was either sick in bed or dead, Wonhyo stepped into the yard and called out loudly, Hello! Who is it? A voice was heard as faint as a mosquito's. It was indistinguishable whether it was a man's or woman's voice. Wonhyo coughed, opened the room door, and thrust his head in. Nothing could be seen in the dark room, only a smell hit his nose. Only after opening his eyes wide and peering for a while did he realize 3 people were lying in the room. Wonhyo entered the room. Hello, he called. He didn't know which person would answer. Who is it? It was the person lying at the bottom of the room. He was clearly a man. I am a passing traveler. But what on earth has happened? Wonhyo asked. I don't know either. At first I was sick, but I am still clinging to life like this, and next my son fell ill. But I don't know if he is dead or alive. Please open the door to the opposite room. My daughter-in-law boiled a spoonful of gruel yesterday evening and hasn't been heard from since, so please see if she is dead or alive. This is my wife, who was delirious until a moment ago, but now seems to have fallen asleep. The one lying next is my daughter. Please see if she is dead or alive. He explained this to Wonhyo in a barely audible voice. Wonhyo touched the head of the person called the wife. It was cold. He touched her wrist. No pulse. Wonhyo said nothing and touched the person next to her, the daughter. Her head was on fire. She was clearly alive. Wonhyo went into the opposite room as the master said. A young man was sawing, breathing heavily, as if about to expire at any moment, and did not seem to recognize being touched. The excrement had not been cleaned, so a foul stench hit the nose. But shockingly, a nursing infant was lying beside him. The baby was alive but seemed exhausted, lying still as if dead. Then where did the daughter-in-law go? Wonhyo came out of the room and looked around. There were no other rooms. Wonhyo opened the kitchen door. There was something white on the kitchen floor. Wonhyo entered the kitchen and touched the white thing. It was clearly a person. The body was warm, so she was not dead. Presumably, she came down to the kitchen to boil something to eat, collapsed, and lost consciousness. Wonhyo carried the daughter-in-law and laid her next to her husband, then immediately boiled water in the pot. He fed the living people first. When he spooned it in, they opened their mouths and ate. The infant also ate greedily. However, the old man who had explained things to Wonhyo just moments ago lost consciousness in the meantime, and water just drooled out when put in his mouth. He had held on to his consciousness out of worry for his family, but seeing someone come to look after them, his pulse had released. Wonhyo knew the master was breathing his last. Beads of sweat flowed from his whole body. The daughter lying in the upper part of the room was delirious, and the young man in the opposite room screamed. But Wonhyo could not just watch the dying person, so he was boiling gruel for the living. Still, there were rats. They made noise and moved around in the dark corners of the kitchen, and sometimes two eyes flashed in the firelight rising from the furnace. The dog had its chin on the kitchen threshold. It seemed very hungry. Wonhyo was hungry too, but had no thought of eating. The young man in the opposite room seemed to be passing the crisis, screaming repeatedly. Steam rose from the gruel pot with a boiling sound. The daughter and daughter-in-law ate some gruel, but the young man only shouted, "Take away the brazier at my feet. Chase away that thief standing there," and refused to eat anything. That night, the old man also passed away. Wonhyo dug 2 graves in the backyard and buried the old man and his wife. However, the 3 young people survived. The young man, who was sure to die, gradually turned around and regained consciousness, and the daughter-in-law also recovered without being seriously ill. The first to rise was the daughter. She was a 16-year-old maiden. But it was still Wonhyo who boiled food and received their waste. Seeing her father and mother missing from the bed, the daughter seemed surprised but did not ask. The daughter-in-law also rose. The nursing infant who survived on gruel was thin but did not die. Seeing the daughter and daughter-in-law stepped down into the yard, Wonhyo quietly left the house. It was after 12 days. The weather turned chilly. Wonhyo's clothes were dirty, and he was cold. Having not eaten or slept well for many days, Wonhyo's body did not feel like his own. However, Wonhyo was happy to have helped sentient beings for the first time in his life. Even if he were to catch that terrible disease and collapse and die on the roadside, it felt like he had finally done something worthwhile coming into the world. Thinking this, he realized how empty his past life had been. The family members did not know what Wonhyo was, having entered when they were delirious with illness. He silently boiled water and gruel, fed them, cleaned their filth, and kept their bedding clean and dry. Even as they gradually regained their senses, they never asked Wonhyo, "Who are you?" It was because asking felt too overwhelming. Whenever they opened their eyes, he was there, and just thinking of thirst, he spooned water into their mouths. He held the baby to sleep and fed it. They thought this could not be a human. They thought it must be some guardian spirit. That was why they dared not ask, and that was why they accepted his salvation with ease. Furthermore, seeing him disappear without a word of coming or going, they thought so even more. However, Wonhyo did not leave the village that day. He buried corpses, nursed the sick, and waited for the sick to cease in the village before leaving. The day he left the village was the day of the first snow, and the last house he helped was the house that had splashed him with rice water. The family of the woman who had doused Wonhyo with rice water had all fallen ill and received Wonhyo's care. On the day Wonhyo left the village, the people who had recovered their health came out to the village entrance to see him off. From now on, help each other among the villagers." Leaving these words, he walked away briskly. Wonhyo was skin and bones. However, there was a clear and pure energy in his face and eyes. It was the light of a bodhisattva who had left all greed. But Wonhyo felt physically tired. He wanted to rest somewhere for a while. Wonhyo sought out a temple called Gamcheonsa. Gamcheonsa was a temple built during the reign of Queen Seondeok, where the famous Dharma master Wang had also stayed for a time. Wonhyo obtained the position of Bulmokani, a servant who tends fires and does chores at Gamcheonsa. What he learned about cooking rice, making gruel, and porridge during the 2 months of nursing in the Dansam village was used here. Wonhyo silently cooked rice and swept the yard. There were about 20 monks, but no one knew he was Wonhyo. They called Wonhyo cow dung, cow dung. Wonhyo was praised for cooking rice well. Originally, there was no high or low in duties in a monk's household. There was a rank between the master and disciple, but cooking or housekeeping were equal duties done by taking turns. However, as the state began to treat monks well, ranks appeared in temples, and the status of monks became fixed. The monk who cooked was always the cooking monk, and the one who ran errands always ran errands. Monks with a little study or who had held a position in the temple did not do tasks like cooking, laundry, cleaning, or carrying loads themselves, but made others do them. Therefore, Wonhyo keeping the fire was the lowest role. No one even looked Wonhyo straight in the face. Even with Wonhyo next to them, the monks spoke shamelessly and frivolously. It was as if they did not count someone like Wonhyo as a person. Wonhyo could rest well. He ate well and his mind was at peace. After finishing the dishes, he would go into the communal room, Pandobang, rest his head on a wooden pillow, and sleep sweetly. Passing begging monks, wanderers, and porters entered the communal room. They had endless stories and laughter. They also spoke crudely. Because they were people at the bottom of life, they had no face to lose. Whatever they said, there was no disgrace. Some would put smelly toes in another's mouth while sleeping, or steal rags and run away in the night, but after a bout of cursing, they would fall asleep snoring again. Even if they put toes in mouths, farted in faces, or picked their anus with a finger and rubbed it on a mouth, it was not such a surprising thing. Once they exchanged a punch and made a noisy ruckus, it was like the traces of passing wind. Sometimes they pestered Wonhyo to perform a talent. Then Wonhyo played the gourd. Everyone laughed and made noise, saying he was good. "Looking at you, you don't seem like it, so how did you become a fire tender?" Some asked Wonhyo this. "Somehow it happened," Wonhyo replied. Wonhyo was able to spend the winter comfortably in the Gamcheonsa kitchen. The kitchen was a bit gloomy but spacious, and sitting looking at the large furnace fire burning brightly made him feel ecstatic, clean, and comfortable. When the rice in the large cauldron was about to settle, a savory aroma filled the kitchen. When he rolled up his sleeves and scooped rice into a large tub, an old monk would come to the kitchen dragging a staff. He liked scorched rice, nurungji, and came to ask Wonhyo for it. This old monk said he had been at this temple since Dharma Master Wang was there. Other monks did not even try to know who this old monk was. He was an old monk who was treated as if he didn't exist. When he came to the kitchen, he told various stories while rice was being scooped. Gathering pieces from his stories, it seemed this old monk had been to war in his youth and had cooked rice and done menial chores like Wonhyo when he came to this temple. Despite being at the temple for so long, he had never held a position. His taste for scorched rice also seemed to be a habit acquired when he was a kitchen servant. Still, he was the only monk who called Wonhyo Sunim, monk, joined his palms, and bowed. Young monks called this old monk Bang-ul Sunim, bell monk. It seemed to be a nickname because he was short and looked like he was rolling roundly when he walked. Or perhaps because his voice was very firm, sounding like metal when he chanted at dawn, Wonhyo thought. Or maybe because he was always smiling, Bangle Bangle. "Sunim, come to my room." Bangle Sunim often said this to Wonhyo. Although he was a nameless monk, because he was an old man who had been at the temple for a long time, he was given a room guarding the Dokshongak, shrine of the lonely saint. "Why would a young fellow like me mind where I sleep?" Wonhyo declined every time. When Wonhyo gave him a large piece of scorched rice, Bangle Sunim would put it in his bosom as if hiding it, bow to Wonyo countless times saying, Kwansum Bosal, and shuffle off to his quarters. Wonyo compared Bangle Sunim and Great Master Dan. He felt Bangle Sunim had shed about half more than Great Master Dan. Great Master Dan seemed to still have some contrivance left, but Bangle Sunim seemed to have absolutely none. Bangle Sunim's state seemed higher and deeper. Once, after finishing dinner, Wonyo went up to the Dokshongak. He was curious because Bangle Sunim had not come down to get scorched rice that day. A light was shining brightly in the Dokshongak, and the sound of Bangle Sunim chanting could be heard from inside. Because the Dokshongak stands apart up a slope even in a large temple, not a single person came there a day unless they were coming to offer prayers to the lonely saint. The Dokshongak, 7 Stars Shrine, and Mountain Spirit Shrine were the most secluded places. There was a small statue in the Dokshongak. It was the figure of an old monk with hunched shoulders, one knee down, one knee up, one hand on the knee, and one hand on the ground, smiling. Wonyo thought the statue of the lonely saint looked like Bangle Sunim, but Bangle Sunim was calling Avalokitesvara, Bodhisattva, in front of it. Sunim, you have come? Having finished the evening rites, Bangle Sunim came out of the Dokshongak and was glad to see Wonyo. He led Wonyo to his room. It was a single room, but in front of the Buddhist altar enshrining Avalokitesvara, a jade lamp hanging from the ceiling shone like a jewel with a twin wick, and it smelled of incense. On one side of the room were a gong and a drum, and on the other wall was a built-in brazier with a small iron pot hanging, and on the reading desk were the Diamond Sutra and Diamond Samadhi Sutra. Bangle Sunim sat wearing his kasaya and robe with the reading desk in front of him. He had a different dignity than when he came to the kitchen to beg for scorched rice. Wonyo took out the scorched rice wrapped in paper, placed it before Bangle Sunim, and said, "The rice was scorched well this evening, so I scraped it and waited, but why didn't you come? How grateful I am." Opening the paper wrap and seeing the yellowish scorched rice, his eyes and face became all smiles. "This will be enough to eat all day tomorrow. It would be tasty to eat it dry, but alas, I must have teeth. Not a single tooth is left, so I boil it like this to eat." Bangle Sunim opened the lid of the small iron pot on the brazier. Inside, something yellowish was boiling like porridge. Bangle Sunim covered it again and said, "It's savory even boiled like this. It is the supreme offering among men, Injung Sanggong. Sometimes I tear off a little and gum it with a dry mouth, but without teeth I don't know that chewy delicacy. Heh." After laughing heartily, he added, "When I was young, I practiced not eating after noon, but now that I'm old, I get hungry even while sleeping. So I boil this in the pot and eat a spoonful when I'm hungry. Still, it tastes good. It is a thankful thing." Saying this, Bangle Sunim tore off a piece of the scorched rice Wonyo brought, put it in his mouth, gummed it, and swallowed his saliva deliciously. It was like a child meeting a treat. "Sunim, do you also drink liquor?" Wonyo asked such a thing. "Liquor?" Bangle Sunim stopped chewing, shook his head, and smiled. "Dan likes liquor." Wonyo was surprised that he knew Dan. "Sunim, do you know Great Master Dan?" "Of course. We went around together when young. Went to Tang China together, too." Bangle Sunim said this. Wonyo was ashamed of his lack of insight. He had thought Bangle Sunim was not an ordinary old man, but he had not imagined he read the Diamond Sutra, had been to Tang China, and was a friend of Great Master Dan. He had just known him as an innocent, ignorant old man. Then, was Bangle Sunim's innocence an innocence born of much study? Yes, is that so? Wonyo forgot he was hiding his identity and said, "I too have met Great Master Dan, but I have never heard what kind of person he originally is or what his name is." He looked at Bangle Sunim with eyes full of curiosity. "Is there a need to say what we all know?" Bangle Sunim said this and laughed. "All know each other? What do you mean we know?" Wonyo asked with a humble heart. "Aren't we all in the same guise? Coming out of a mother's belly, shitting and pissing, full when eating, drunk when drinking, heart moved when seeing a woman, sentient beings who have done this for millions of kalpas. So what is there not to know about who is who by not speaking? We all know each other. Ha ha, isn't that so? Didn't the world-honored one say he knows all the minds of beings in the 3 realms? Even the world-honored one served you in past lives, knowing the mental states of all beings. The pine nuts a squirrel likes, I like too. And the scorched rice I like, the squirrel likes too. You, Sunim, are a Hwyom lecturer, so you must know better than me. Everything is created by the mind alone. Ilche Yusim Jo. I am a Hwyom lecturer? Wonhyo showed surprise. Yes, probably great Master Wonhyo. Indeed, I am Wonhyo, but do you know I am Wonhyo Sunim? Wonhyo Sunim's spiritual power is still insufficient to cover my eyes, though blinding the eyes of dozens of monks at Gamcheon Sa shows your power is considerable. But Sunim cannot yet blind the eyes of the gods. Oh, I spoke useless words again. What is the way not to be seen by ghosts? Wonhyo asked. If my mind is empty, I am seen by no one, Bangle Sunim answered. To empty my mind? You must eliminate self. Sunim, you may have shed the 5 desires, but it seems arrogance, Aman, still remains. Since you detached from the 5 desires, petty ghosts cannot approach, but since arrogance remains, you catch the eyes of the gods. If Sunim discards even arrogance, even the Hwyom gods won't find your trace. Arrogance, the mind that says, I am this much, I will save sentient beings, is arrogance. The world-honored one preached the Diamond Sutra to Suputi to break this. Giving without attachment to form, Mujusangbosi, raising the mind without abiding anywhere. Wonhyo stood up and bowed to Bangle Sunim. Bangle Sunim received Wonhyo's bow while seated. From then on, Wonhyo listened to the Diamond Sutra and Diamond Samadhi Sutra and learned San Zen from Bangle Sunim every night. Wonhyo could clearly see when he had been spotted by ghosts, not to mention before, but when leaving Dansam village thinking, I did a good deed, the ghosts surely saw him. Then, after coming to Gamcheon Sa, when he looked at high-ranking monks as rice bags and greed-filled sacks and felt proud of himself, the ghosts at Gamcheon Sa surely saw him and laughed. Reflecting further, there were many opportunities where he caught the ghost's eye. Even the Dharma should be discarded, how much more so the non-Dharma. Discard everything, even the self. If the root of self remains, the sprout of 5 desires will shoot up again when it rains. Wonhyo strove to dig out the root of self under Bangle Sunim's body and burn the seed of self. Sunim, it is difficult. One day Wonhyo lamented this before Bangle Sunim. Is it difficult? Bangle Sunim smiled. I have never said difficult in my life, but this alone is truly difficult. It is harder than dying, Wonhyo confessed. Indeed, it is harder than dying. Killing this one body is easy, but cutting off the eternal cycle of reincarnation is difficult without the aid of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Bangle Sunim said this. In fact, the practice of pulling out the root of self could not be compared to the fasting asceticism of the Sangadang. Following the root of self, he truly did not know the end. Wonhyo thought of looking for grass roots in the sand when playing as a child. The more he dug into the sand, the more the hair-like roots filled with branches, becoming 10 strands, 100 strands, limitless. At that time, a child said, they say the grass root is stuck in King Yama's head. Wonhyo thought the depth and entanglement of the root of self were like this. Yet if even one thread-like root remained, a new self would arise, repeating endless reincarnation. One day, Wonhyo said this to Bangle Sunim. He said the root of self was hard to pull out. At that time, Bangle Sunim said, why not cast away the mind that sees the root of self as so deep? Isn't that the root of delusion? Wonhyo realized his eyes opening at these words. Wonhyo slapped his knee as if remembering something forgotten, and recited the verse of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva from the Rokana Buddha chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra. The immeasurable worlds atop the Buddha land form and crumble, but they are neither born nor destroyed. Like flowers and leaves blooming and falling on trees, so is the making and unmaking of all Buddha lands. Like various fruits on various trees, there are various sentient beings in various lands. As seeds differ, fruits are not the same. As deeds, karma are various, lands are various. Like the wish-fulfilling jewel emitting any color at will. If all delusions are discarded, one sees only the pure land. Like clouds appearing in the sky by the power of the Dragon King, all Buddha fields arise by the Buddha's primal vow. Like a skilled magician performing various tricks, Buddha fields are immeasurable by the karma of sentient beings. Just as one sees a painted image and knows it is the creation of a painter, view the Buddha land knowing it is the painting of the mind painter. As the minds of sentient beings are not the same, they raise various delusions. Thus, all Buddha fields are all like phantoms. Wonhyo realized anew that the world he saw appeared due to his own karma, that the root of self is deep and hard to cut, is also ultimately a delusion coming from his own mental activity. The world that appeared before Wonhyo, who cut off all delusions, was precisely, or there are 7 jewel lands, flat, even, dwelling in adornment, arising from pure karma power, subtle, good, and peaceful. In that Buddha land there are only paths of humans and heavens, merit and fruit accomplished, always receiving various joys. It was a beautiful land. Overflowing with joy, Wonhyo beat the drum with the stick beside him and stood up to dance. While Wonhyo danced, Bangal Sunim played the gong and drum. Then Bangal Sunim also stood up and danced. After the two danced together for a while, Bangal Sunim recited a verse. Like 1,000 moons rising, the void is nowhere unlit. Sitting in the practice hall free from filth, the light is also like this. Wonhyo responded, for the sake of each and every sentient being, practicing asceticism for immeasurable kalpas, not extinguishing the difficulty of birth and death, able to be a great guide. He recited the verse of the Buddha cloud of all merits surpassing Mount Sumeru. Bangal Sunim said, good, good, praising Wonhyo's intent, and continued, exhausting Rokana, because of the bottom of the primal vow, Samantabhadra's body form is like the void, relying on suchness, not relying on Buddha lands, manifesting bodies immeasurably, widely answering sentient beings. Knowing the primal vow of Rokana Buddha to the bottom and practicing it, the body of Samantabhadra is like the void, relying on suchness rather than Buddha lands, manifesting immeasurable bodies to widely answer the call of sentient beings. This was Bangal Sunim's intent to encourage Wonhyo. A bodhisattva cultivating the way ceaselessly for immeasurable kalpas is not for himself, but to save sentient beings from suffering. Yet one must not hold the thought, I save sentient beings. That is the mark of self, mark of person, mark of sentient being, and mark of life. Leaving all these marks is what is called Buddha. Wonhyo cooked rice and drew water morning and evening as before. And Bangal Sunim shuffled down, dragging his staff to get scorched rice. Spring came to Gamchonsa, and azaleas and peach blossoms bloomed. One day at evening time, Bangal Sunim came down to get scorched rice. Sunim, there is a funny thing. Bangal Sunim smiled broadly. No one else came to the wide kitchen. What is it? Wonhyo asked while scooping rice from the cauldron with a paddle. The savory smell of rice was strong. I heard on my way that the student monks here are learning Sunim's commentary on the awakening of faith. It works out. They eat rice cooked by Wonhyo Sunim and learn the commentary on the awakening of faith written by Wonhyo Sunim. Doesn't it work out? Bangal Sunim laughed pleasantly. Wonhyo also smiled. But he was careful not to be seen by ghosts at such a time. Taking a free moment, Wonhyo went in front of the lecture hall and eavesdropped. While discussing Bodhisattva Asvaghosha, the author of Awakening of Faith, the topic turned to Great Master Wonhyo. Great Master Wonhyo is also a bodhisattva manifestation. Someone said this. Great Master Wonhyo knew from birth and understood without a teacher. Someone said this. If Great Master Wonhyo is a bodhisattva, an incarnation, why did he break his vows because of Princess Yosok? Someone attacked Wonhyo like this. That must all be an expedient means, upaya. Someone defended Wonhyo. If sleeping with a beauty is an expedient means, it's a harmless expedient. Everyone laughed. It seemed only student monks were gathered. Wonhyo smiled bitterly. Just as he was about to withdraw from the eavesdropping spot, a student monk opened the door and came out, bumping into Wonhyo. Why are you standing here? The student glared at Wonhyo. I was eavesdropping a little on the monk's discussion. Wonhyo politely stepped down to the courtyard. So, what did you overhear? The student tried to mock Wonhyo. I overheard you slandering Wonhyo. Haha, so does the offering provider, Gongyangju, know Great Master Wonhyo? The student seemed interested. Other students, finding interest in the dialogue between the two, rushed out to the veranda. I heard the rumor that a monk named Wonhyo slept with Princess Yosok and had a child, Wonhyo replied. So, was it a good thing or a bad thing that Great Master Wonhyo slept with Princess Yosok? Another student asked Wonhyo. Well, since he thought it was wrong, Great Master Wonhyo quit being a monk and goes around as a wanderer, doesn't he? But what would you monks do? Wonhyo said this and laughed. The students looked at each other. He's a cheeky fellow. One student glared at Wonhyo and went into the room. Wonhyo's words had struck the crown of the students' heads with strange weight. They felt they had been humiliated. A realized person's words have the power to suppress people even in a casual remark. Not only people, but ghosts are also suppressed by the words and actions of a realized person, because it does not come from their own greed, but from compassion. February 15th was the day the world-honored one entered nirvana under the sal trees. December 15th was the day of enlightenment. Like the Enlightenment Day on December 15th, Gamcheonsa held a nirvana ceremony and a sermon on the Nirvana Sutra on this day. The students were happy that the winter retreat, Dongango, ended today, but Wonhyo was very busy making rice cakes. Many laymen and laywomen gathered from the village. With only a few days left until Qingming, the weather was very mild and drizzle fell every other day. After the nirvana ceremony, Wonhyo decided to leave Gamcheonsa. Thanks to you, I spent the winter comfortably. Wonhyo went around the temple saying his farewells. Where are you going? Some asked. Is there a fixed place? Wonhyo replied. If you have nowhere to go, stay here longer. Some tried to detain him. People who usually ignored him expressed regret upon hearing he was leaving. Wonhyo was happy about that. You truly worked well. Some praised Wonhyo's service. Wonhyo packed a lot of scorched rice and went up to the Doksongak. Bangul Sunim was beating the drum and chanting. Wonhyo waited for the chanting to end. Bangul Sunim, sitting wearing his robe and beating the gong and drum, seemed entirely like the void. It seemed no smell would come from his body. Furthermore, the chanting voice was clear. It was a sound devoid of all greed. The sound seemed to fill the entire Dharma realm. It was chanting solely for the sake of sentient beings. Sentient beings suffering and burning in the fire of 5 desires in the sea of suffering would seem to gain immediate coolness upon hearing this sound. Though plain with no pretension or variation, the sound resonated to the top of heaven and the bottom of Avicii hell to cool the suffering of beings there. Wonhyo himself felt his body was in the Pure Land. He felt an indescribable peace. The dong sounds of the gong and drum were not ordinary sounds either. It did not seem like such sounds would come if Wonhyo beat them himself. It was not beating the drum with a stick, but beating the drum with Bangul Sunim's Dharma body, Dharmakaya. The chanting sound, A, and the drum sound blended together and were not two. The body of Bangul Sunim sounding them also blended together. Wonhyo reflected on the chanting sounds he made while wandering from village to village. That was a sound Wonhyo made with his throat, not with the Dharma body. Even in Wonhyo's chanting, wasn't there a playful arrogance? Of course, Wonhyo did not chant in jest, but with sincerity. However, compared to Bangul Sunim's chanting, his sound seemed like a joke, drunken talk and powerless. It seemed unlikely to have the power to enter the ears of beings, move their souls, and cause them to raise the Bodhi mind. Wonhyo sighed. Gold and clay, Wonhyo lamented inwardly. He seemed to be a vessel made of clay. Even great Master Dayan's chanting seemed to lack this power. A person who has shed all dirt from the mind is the most beautiful among the beautiful, and the highest among the high. Like 1,000 suns rising, the void is nowhere unlit. Sitting in the practice hall, free from filth, the light is also like this. Wonhyo felt like he was seeing a Buddha for the first time. It felt as if infinite time had passed in the meantime. The chanting and drum sounds ceased, and Bangul Sunim stood up and bowed. World-honored one with one mind, I take refuge in the 10 directions, unhindered light Tathagata, wishing to be born in the land of peace and bliss. Reciting Nagarjuna Bodhisattva's verse, he bowed. He raised both arms high to draw a circle in the air, joined his palms, and bowed. After doing this 10 times, he turned his head and smiled at Wonhyo standing outside the door. I am leaving now. Wonhyo said this without other words. And putting the bag of scorched rice into the room, he said, This is the last time I offer scorched rice to Sunim. This time it is well scorched, and I brought a lot. Bangul Sunim joined his palms to express thanks. Since Wonhyo was wearing gaiters, prepared for travel, he did not enter the room but bowed deeply from outside the door. Bangul Sunim came out to the yard and bid farewell to Wonhyo. but there were no words between them. There was nothing to say. Minds communicate even without words. This would likely be the last farewell in this life. Wonhyo would not come to Gamcheonsa again, and Bangal Sunim did not seem likely to leave Gamcheonsa. But who knows how many 100 million times these two had such farewells? If karma remains, they meet again. Countless repetitions. Next time they might meet in Amida Buddha's land of peace and bliss. In the endless bodhisattva practice, they would go to the land of peace and bliss once. But as practitioners who say, for the sake of each and every sentient being, practicing asceticism for immeasurable kalpas, not extinguishing the difficulty of birth and death, who knows how many more times they will come to this Silla land, or how many times they will go to the paths of hell, hungry ghosts and animals. On such paths they will meet and meet again. There is no place where a needle can stand in this world where a bodhisattva has not given his life for sentient beings. In the eyes of a bodhisattva, all sentient beings are equal. They hold the heart of a loving only son toward any sentient being. They do not spare their life to save even one being. They die 1,000, 10,000 times until that being is saved. This is the great compassion of a bodhisattva. The day all boundless beings are saved in this manner is the day the bodhisattva's practice is completed. Ordinary people are dumbfounded when hearing such words, but a bodhisattva does not get tired of even this. Wonhyo trudged toward the temple entrance. At that moment, "Great Master Wonhyo, Great Master Wonhyo," a voice calling from behind was heard. Wonhyo turned his head. Bangal Sunim was waving his hand on the terrace in front of the main hall. Wonhyo walked quickly to Bangal Sunim's side. "I forgot to give you this book." He gave Wonhyo a book wrapped in a blue cloth. "It is the Diamond Samadhi Sutra. It seems right to pass this book to Sunim," Bangal Sunim said. "I receive it." Wonhyo received the book with both hands and raised it high above his bowed head. At the sound of Bangal Sunim calling, "Great Master Wonhyo," student monks rushed out and looked at Bangal Sunim and Wonhyo like dumbfounded people. Wonhyo bowed once more to Bangal Sunim, bowed again to the students and other monks standing around, and went out toward the entrance. "Old Master, who is the person you just called Great Master Wonhyo?" a student asked Bangal Sunim. "That monk going there now is Great Master Wonhyo. Since you monks ate the food Great Master Wonhyo cooked all winter, you will all attain Buddhahood." Bangal Sunim laughed. The monks were shocked to hear that the monk who cooked in the kitchen all winter was Great Master Wonhyo. Especially the two monks who mocked Wonhyo outside the lecture hall were even more surprised and ashamed. But more than that, they were resentful that they had failed to recognize a great spiritual teacher, Kalyanamitra, right beside them. "Old Master, is it true?" The student who had said "cheeky fellow" to Wonhyo asked Bangal Sunim. His name was Uimyong. "What do you mean, is it true? Is that monk clearly Great Master Wonhyo?" "I said he is. He is Great Master Wonhyo, who wrote the commentary on the awakening of faith that you are studying." Bangal Sunim answered and laughed. "How did you know he was Great Master Wonhyo, old master?" "He gave me scorched rice well, so I knew he was Great Master Wonhyo." Bangal Sunim laughed. Uimyong immediately packed his bag and left following Wonhyo. To a friend asking where he was going, he threw back the answer without looking back, "I am following Great Master Wonhyo." Uimyong walked 20 li from there and met Wonhyo waiting for a ferry by the river. Uimyong prostrated himself before Wonhyo on the damp riverbank earth of spring, and with his head bowed he pleaded, "Sunim, please forgive the sin of not recognizing you and allow this humble monk to attend to you." Wonhyo helped Uimyong up and said, "Ha, Bangal Sunim must have spoken useless words. From today I will attend to you, Sunim." There were even tears in Uimyong's eyes. "Attend to me? Do you know how to cook, do laundry, and sew?" Wonhyo asked jokingly. "I have never done such work," Uimyong answered honestly. "Then should I attend to you, Sunim?" Wonhyo said this and laughed. Green grass was sprouting by the river, and muddy water flowed silently. The ferry boat was tied to the opposite bank, the boatmen gone, bobbing up and down with the waves. Here and there farmers were sowing spring barley, and skylarks had not yet sung. Uimyong stood with joined palms waiting for Wonhyo's permission. "What will you do following me, who wanders aimlessly like a cloud?" "Not only that, Bangol Sunim in the Dokseonggak of Gamcheonsa is truly the foremost virtuous monk in the East. Rather than following me, learn from Bangol Sunim. Even if you learn until that Sunim passes away, you will not learn all of his high spiritual power. Wonhyo admonished Wimyong gently like this. I was at Gamcheonsa for 3 years but did not recognize who Bangol Sunim was. I just looked down on him as an ignorant old monk. Even though you cooked our rice for a whole winter, no one in the temple recognized you as Great Master Wonhyo, and we spoke rudely. Hearing the old master at Dokseonggak say you were Great Master Wonhyo, I couldn't believe it at first. I never dreamed that Great Master Wonhyo, the king's teacher and famous under heaven, would cook our rice. I thought if it were Great Master Wonhyo, he would dress like a noble and not walk. But when I realized you were truly Great Master Wonhyo, I felt like I was sweating blood all over. So I followed you like this. I decided to follow you until death wherever you go. Wimyong spoke thus, showing his firm intent to follow Wonhyo. Wimyong was Jajang Yulsa's half-brother, close like a brother to Uyen. Uyen was destined to become a monk and later prime minister to King Hyoso. If your brother is Jajang Yulsa, why don't you learn from him but wander the countryside? At Wonhyo's question, Wimyong replied, I dislike Jajang Yulsa in my heart. Wonhyo took Wimyong and went down along the water. Following the stream originating from Mount Taebaek leads to where it joins the distributaries of the Nakdong River. Spring was the best time for walking. There were no biting insects yet, so sleeping was comfortable. As they went down from the mountains to the fields, spring deepened. Wonhyo ate grass roots and leaves and slept in the open, and Wimyong did not dislike it but did as Wonhyo did. Wonhyo saw that Wimyong's will was quite firm. Finally, the two entered the territory of Ilseonju and arrived at Nangsan Dorisa, Dori Temple. Dorisa is the site of Mori's house. Mori was the first Buddhist believer among Silla people. It is said that during the reign of King Nulji, a monk named Mukoda first came to Silla and stayed at Mori's house. Mukoda was, of course, not the monk's name. It was a nickname Silla people called him, meaning black barbarian. Being a black barbarian, he was undoubtedly a person from the western regions, India, Central Asia. By this time, it was already 200 years after Buddhism had entered China. So likely a Western monk who had been to China came to Silla. Ancient records say Mukoda came from Goguryeo. In any case, he came alone to a foreign land 10,000 li away to spread the way. Records state that when Mukoda came from Goguryeo to Ilseongun in Silla, the villager Morie dug the ground, made a room, and hid him. At that time, Liang, China, sent an envoy to Silla, and among the gifts was something fragrant. The Silla court did not know what the incense was or how to use it, so they sent an official to ask around. Seeing this, Mukoda said, "This is called incense. If you burn this, fragrance arises, conveying sincerity to the spirits. Spirits refer to nothing other than the 3 jewels. First is Buddha, second is Dharma, third is Sangha. If you burn this incense and make a vow, there will surely be a miraculous response." At that time, the princess was seriously ill. The king invited Mukoda to burn incense and pray, and the princess's illness was cured. The king was greatly pleased and rewarded Mukoda very generously. Mukoda returned to Mori's house, gave all the items received from the king to Mori to repay his debt, said, "I have somewhere to go, so I am leaving," and his whereabouts became unknown. This is the entirety of the record regarding Mukoda. Being an Indian with a dark face and different nose and eyes, entering a foreign country alone must have been incredibly difficult. Seeing that Mori dug a pit to hide him suggests Mukoda's safety was in great danger. Silla, like Goguryeo and Baekje, was a country that revered spirits. It was a country that worshipped the highest 8 gods, A, Ga, Na, Da, Ma, Ba, Sa, and various gods derived from them. The king's duty was to serve the gods and make the people serve them well. Politics, industry, and culture were all centered on or aimed at serving these gods. With the entry of Chinese thought into Silla, the pure belief in gods was somewhat disturbed, but on the other hand, a strong exclusionary sentiment arose to protect the indigenous spirit worship, use and ideology, against foreign thoughts. The various actions Silla took against Buddhism were due to this. After Mukoda left, a person named Ado came to Silla again. There is a record about Ado entering Silla in the reign of King Bicheo, Master Ado came with 3 attendants, stayed and recited sutras and Vinaya, and occasionally there were those who believed and practiced. Also, in Gogi, old records, Ado's visit to Silla is written as follows. On March 11th of the first year of Datong, of Liang, Ado arrived in Ilseon-gun, and heaven and earth shook. Master Ado held a metal-ringed staff in his left hand, a jade bowl in his right, wore a misty robe, and chanted Hwajeon as he came to the believer Moria's house. Mori went out to see him and was startled, saying, "Before, when the Goguryeo monk Jongbang entered our country, the king and ministers killed him, saying something inauspicious had come. Also, when the monk Myel Guja came from Goguryeo, he was killed as before. Why have you come, master? Please enter quickly. The villagers might see." He welcomed Ado, put him in a secluded room, and served him with devotion. At that time, an envoy from Wu came to Silla and offered 5 types of incense to King Namul, but the king did not know their use and sent a messenger to ask widely throughout the country. The messenger asked the Dharma master, Ado, and the master said it is burned to make offerings to the Buddha. When the messenger came to the capital with the master, the king had the master meet the envoy. The envoy bowed to the master and said, "How did the high master come to this distant country?" Seeing this, the king realized Buddhist monks should be respected and issued a decree allowing the propagation. So it is written in Goji. From this, it seems Ado fulfilled his mission smoothly. But Goreoksang Sisa says Ado was also beheaded but came to Moria's house by supernatural power to hide. Another book says Ado was originally from Goguryeo, went to Wei and studied under Xuanchang for 19 years, then returned. By his mother Go Donyong's order, he came to Silla and lived in a village west of the palace, asking King Michu to practice Buddhism. However, as it was unprecedented and strange, they tried to kill Ado, so he retreated to hide in the house of Morok in Sokchon, which is now Seonju. While hiding for 3 years, Princess Songguk fell ill and did not recover. People were sent to find a healer, and Master Ado responded, entered the palace, and cured the illness. The king was greatly pleased and asked for his wish. The master said he would be satisfied if a temple were built in Chongyong-ri, and the king granted it. However, public opinion and the people were stubborn and did not listen, so an ordinary house was made into a temple. Only after 7 years did someone appear wanting to become a monk to receive the Dharma. Morok's sister Sasi also became a nun and built a temple at Samcheongi, which is Yonghongsa. When King Michu died and the next king did not believe and tried to abolish Buddhism, the master returned to Sokchon, made a grave with his own hands, entered it, closed the door, and died. Thus, Buddhism could not be practiced in Silla until King Wanzhong Beofeng revived it over 200 years later. This was the time when Sundo entered Goguryeo during King Sosurim's reign, and Marananta entered Baekje from the western regions during King Chimnyu's reign, so both countries were practicing Buddhism. Even when Ado was in Goguryeo, the state built Hongboksa, a large temple, for the master to reside in. However, Ado desired not comfort and treatment, but to spread the light to the world, so he abandoned comfort and chose difficulty. Ado is said to be a monk from Chin, or India, or a Goguryeo person who went to Wei and returned to Silla, or that his mother was from Goguryeo and his father was a Wei envoy named Gulma. It is unknown which is correct, but his appearance was peculiar. He performed miracles well, devoted his life to spreading the way, and it is said flowers rained from the sky when he preached. In any case, there is no doubt that Ado was a person who swore to spread Buddhism in Silla and sacrificed his body. After Ado left, 11 kings and 200 years passed before Buddhism was permitted by the state under King Beofeng, Wonjong, and even then, it only happened after Ichadon sacrificed his life. Thus, 4 people sacrificed themselves to spread Buddhism in Silla. Goguryeo monks Jongbang, Myelguja, Ado, and Ichadon. Wonhyo came to Dorisa to reflect on the traces of these predecessors who sacrificed themselves for the way, first to firm his own resolve, and second to make the resolve of Wimyong, Asaga, and Sasama great and firm. Even at Dorisa, Wonhyo did not state his real name. He strictly ordered Wimyong not to reveal who Wonhyo was. This was not to hide or avoid the annoyance of being famous, but because he feared that receiving respect and offerings from the public would make his will arrogant and his body covet comfort. After staying at Dorisa for a few days and becoming familiar with the community, Wonhyo obtained permission from the temple to build a small hermitage in a valley of Mount Nangsan. Wonhyo prepared a saw, axe, and A-frame carrier, and with just Wimyong, he leveled the site, cut and carried timber, and carried stones and earth every day. During this time, they went down to the village once a day to beg for food, and if there was a ceremony at the main temple, they used the food obtained there for 1 or 2 days' rations. Sunim, isn't cutting grass and trees like this and killing insects killing living things? Sal sang. Once, during a break from work, Wimyong asked this. To build a house, one has to cut many trees and dig up grass roots, and in doing so, birds and insects that relied on them lose their homes or are directly killed. Wimyong felt pity for this. Why isn't it killing? Wonhyo answered. Then is it okay for a monk, Shramana, to kill? Wimyong asked. Is the Saha world a world where one can live without killing? Wonhyo answered. Then what is the difference between a monk and a secular person? Ordinary people kill others for themselves, and bodhisattvas kill others to save sentient beings. Do you know how many beings were trampled to death by the world-honored one's feet? Did not the world-honored one eat pork before entering nirvana? Yet the world-honored one never killed a living thing. Wonhyo answered like this. Why does that not count as killing? Because the world-honored one never lived for himself. At Wonhyo's words, Wimyong bowed, saying, I understand. Then what is killing with selection, salsang utaik? Wimyong asked again. That is for secular people to keep. Does a bodhisattva have no killing? Yes, a bodhisattva does not kill, even if he kills all beings in the 3 realms. It is compassion. I understand. Wimyong bowed once more. Another time, Wimyong asked Wonhyo, what is Son Zen? Bodhidharma came to China during the reign of Emperor Wu of Liang, so it was 50 or 60 years ago, and Dharma Zen was just beginning to enter Baekje and Silla. Until now, mantra and Vinaya were most prevalent, and Hwyom and Lotus were esteemed by some scholar monks, but Dharma Zen was still only a rumor in general society. So Wimyong asked Wonhyo about this. Wonhyo pointed to the stream flowing before his feet and said, Zen is like this. The mountain stream flowed following the terrain, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes making noise, sometimes silent, reflecting rocks if there were rocks, reflecting clouds if clouds came, without any fabrication, without haste, and without stopping. Wimyong stared into the water for a long time to understand Wonhyo's meaning. A little over a month after starting work, Wonhyo's hermitage was completed. It had 3 rooms, a large central hall and small rooms on the left and right, and a kitchen was attached. The yard was leveled, and they obtained a well. A fairly large stream flowed beside the house, so the sound of water could be heard from the room after rain, and even without rain, it could be heard if one went close. He also built a pavilion on the cliff by the stream. Sitting here, one could see the moon rise. If one climbed the high hill west of the hermitage, distant mountains and fields could be seen. Dorisa main temple was not visible, but the bell sound rang morning and evening. By the time the house was finished, both Wonhyo and Wimyong had improved their carpentry skills significantly. Their skill in plastering mud also improved. Fortunately, there were many kudzu roots nearby, so Wonhyo ate kudzu roots as he had learned from Monk Dan. He chewed them raw or ground and mashed them to eat. It is said that grass before Dano, 5th day of 5th lunar month, has no poison. There were many edible grasses in the mountain. However, Wonhyo and Wimyong did not know how to distinguish edible grass from inedible grass. Once, an old monk passing by visited Wonhyo's hermitage, perhaps having heard news from the main temple. The old monk knew well which grasses and roots were edible and how to cook them deliciously. He also taught them how to make starch from kudzu roots. Wonhyo and Wimyong followed this old monk around the mountain for 3 days, learning about and picking many spring grasses, tree shoots, and roots. The old monk explained that there are things to eat in summer and things to eat in autumn and throughout winter. He taught that bellflower, atractylodes, codonopsis, and kudzu are the 4 roots. Acorns, chestnuts, pine nuts, and hazelnuts are the 4 fruits, and pine bark and elm bark are the 2 barks. He also taught them to collect honey. He said if one gets sick in summer and needs meat, catch and roast a snake, and in winter, eat rabbit. The world-honored one also said it is okay to feed meat to sick people. The old monk said this too. This old monk was always moving his mouth. He seemed to be reciting mantras or chanting. After the old monk left, life at Wonhyo's hermitage became very abundant. There was much to eat. Among the teachings, learning to make candles from ash tree wax was especially grateful. Ash trees have something like white powder dough on their bark. One scrapes this to make candles. There is the sun during the day and the moon and stars at night, but there are times when this is needed. The old monk said this and laughed while molding the wax into candles. He also taught that if begged rice has gone sour, washing it several times in water until the smell is gone and boiling it with mugwort makes it good to eat. He also said lily roots and mountain yam roots are good to eat, but arisema and Pinellia, banha, cause the throat to swell if eaten. If asked his name, the old monk just opened his eyes wide, and if asked where he was going, he stomped his foot once. He spoke no words other than what was necessary. Sunim, isn't that old monk a Goguryeo person? His accent sounds like a Goguryeo person. After the monk disappeared into the valley, Wimyong asked Wonhyo. Perhaps, Wonhyo answered. But Wonhyo was thinking more about the monk's spiritual eye and state of mind than his nationality. Wonhyo felt the infinite breadth and depth of the Buddhist path from Great Master Dan, then Bangul Sunim, and this time from the nameless old monk, and lamented how childish his own power was. Wimyong. Wonhyo suddenly called Wimyong. Yes, what do you think of that old monk? I think he is a Goguryeo person. With a thunderous voice, Wonhyo shouted, Go! Go! Meant to wake up. Wimyong was terrified. It was the first time he had heard such a loud shout from Wonhyo. Usually he laughed and joked like a friend, but this shout was frightening. Seeing Wimyong standing with bowed head and joined palms, Wonhyo shouted again, Did you understand? I do not know the meaning. Go and gather a load of wood, Wonhyo ordered. Wimyong took an A-frame and sickle and went up the mountain. He wondered what was wrong with the old monk being a Goguryeo person. Returning from the mountain in the evening, Wimyong bowed to Wonhyo. Did you understand? Wonhyo's words were soft. Yes, say it. I have not yet become a monk, Wonhyo nodded. On April 8th, Wonhyo wrote and hung a signboard named Mueam, Hermitage of No Hindrance, on this hermita, and he carved a juniper Buddha with his own hands and enshrined it in the altar. Wonhyo spent a year at this hermitage with Wimyong. Wimyong respected Wonhyo even more. He saw the great light inside Great Master Wonhyo, who seemed loose at first glance. The first person to visit Wonhyo at Nengsan Mueam was Sasama. It was a day in June when rain poured down. Sasama came to Mueam in the pouring rain and bowed before Wonhyo. Wonhyo was surprised and glad, asking, How did you come? Sasama's story was as follows. Since there was no news for a year after Wonhyo left Gasanga, Sasama and Asaga could not wait and asked their grandfather what to do. The grandfather asked, What did the master tell you when he left? He said, Serve your old grandfather and mother at home for now. That is the Buddhist way, Sasama answered. The grandfather, Sasanga, asked again, looking at his grandson and granddaughter, Did he not say when you would meet? He said, We will meet when the time comes. When the time comes. Old Sasanga pondered for a while and said, That means for you to come find him. By this time, the sick mother had already passed away. The next day, Sasanga's grandfather called Sasama and ordered, Leave today. Wherever you go, find your teacher. So Sasama set out. If you find where the master is, come back immediately, so I can go too. His sister Asaga asked this of Sasama. At first, Sasama started walking in the direction Wonhyo had gone, describing Wonhyo's appearance everywhere and asking if they had seen such a person. The reason he did not ask for Great Master Wonhyo was because he thought Wonhyo would have hidden his identity. I met someone at Dansum and asked, and he said he knew. He said such a gentleman stayed in our village for 2 months, saving many dying people, but he said the gentleman did not tell his name. He asked me who that gentleman was, so I said he was Great Master Wonhyo. Sasama's eyes shone as if rekindling the joy of that moment. Sasama continued, and I stopped by Gamchonsa and heard the details. At Sasama's words, Wonhyo asked, Did you see an old monk named Bangul Sunim there? When asking this, Wonhyo straightened his body and joined his palms to show respect for his teacher. Yes, Someone at the main temple said if I wanted to know about great Master Wonhyo, go see Bangal Sunim at the Dokshonggak, so I went to see him, and I slept by that old monk's side that night. Sasama said this. Did that old monk eat scorched rice? Wonhyo asked. I did not see him eat scorched rice. Sasama answered, wondering what scorched rice meant. Uimyong also asked Sasama various things about Gamcheonsa. After staying for 2 or 3 days, Sasama went home. It was to report to his grandfather that he had found great Master Wonhyo's dwelling. Sasama was greatly praised by his grandfather. He was very happy that Sasama had found the master's traceless path alone in half a year. On the day Asaga and Sasama left home, old Sasanga dressed in ceremonial robes and performed a reporting ritual bongo at the shrine, stating he was sending his granddaughter and grandson to a great teacher to save this country. Asaga also changed her maiden hair to a boy's braid and wore men's clothes. The brother and sister knelt before their grandfather like brothers, waiting for his final instruction. The grandfather was old. Though his eyes were like stars and his body like iron from long practice, wrinkles and white hair could not be hidden. Moreover, having lost his son in war and now sending his grandson and granddaughter away aimlessly was heartbreaking for the grandfather. However, Sasanga was a man who had never thought of his body or family in his life. He only thought of training the young people of Silla to strengthen the country. In his 70 years, he taught thousands of young men and women as a master of the Gasanga Hall. Among them, hundreds had died bravely fighting for the Keri, Auntry, and some were still alive working as soldiers, officials, or teachers for the country. But in his thoughts, his power seemed like snow melting on a burning stove. A truly great figure to succeed him was rarely taught. Most became a crowd seeking their own wealth and fame with small powers gained. He had 2 sons. The eldest had noble aspirations and showed promise, but died in the Battle of Hansen, and the second was still alive but was not material to maintain a household. In his later years, he pinned his hope on his granddaughter Asaga and grandson Sasama. Asaga was a girl but extremely intelligent and high-minded, so he kept her by his side and taught her through various hardships. At 15, she was already a Gasara leader of Gasanga and had the power to lead others. Sasama, 2 years younger, was also intelligent and seemed to have a large capacity. So he believed these siblings were the ones to bring glory to his house and become great strength for the country, loving them dearly and pinning his hopes on them. The grandfather looked at the 2 young people for a while and opened his mouth. When do you plan to return home after leaving now? This was the grandfather's first question. We intend to visit home once a year. Sasama answered thus. Asaga sought the woman's propriety and deferred the answer to her brother. No, there was anger in the grandfather's voice. No, do not think of returning home for 10 or 20 years until your way is full. Even if you hear rumors that I have died, there is no need to return. Forgetting your grandfather and achieving the way to become a great light for the country is filial piety to your dead father, mother, and this grandfather. Do you understand? At these words, tears welled up in the siblings, and they could not answer. Yet they could not raise their hands to wipe the tears nor look away, so they let the tears pour down like raindrops on their knees. The grandfather also sat silently for a while. He felt a stinging in his eyes. Now stop crying. After a while, the grandfather ordered. He tolerated their tears in this instance as natural affection. With permission, Asaga and Sasama lifted their sleeves to wipe their tears. But the more they wiped, the more fresh tears surged. The grandfather was the person they missed most. Although he was usually stern and rarely smiled, they had known since childhood that deep love existed within. If they could not return even once a year, it felt like they would never see their longing grandfather's face again in this life. When the sleeves wiping the tears got wet, the wet sleeves felt even more sorrowful. If a person is born into the world, they must do something worthwhile. The sun gives light, the dragon gives rain, and the spirits all have duties. Since you were born with such intelligence and integrity, it must be the command of the pestle god, Bangasin, for you to do some great work. There will be many big and difficult events in our country in the future. There will be wars with Baekje and Goguryeo, and if wars drag on, many people will die, and famine and disease will come. If that happens, the people's minds will easily become disturbed, and a great disaster might befall the country. At such times, holding up the country and rectifying the people's minds is the duty of a person of the way. To handle such a great duty, one must be beaten by a great teacher and have great study. One must have study that remains unshaken, even if thunder strikes the head, and indifferent, even if wealth comes. But I am not such a teacher. In my view, great Master Wonhyo is the great teacher who can beat you and make you into gold-like people. So entrust your bodies to that elder. The way of serving a teacher is like the way of serving a king. Therefore, king, teacher, and parent are one body. Among them, the teacher is the one who teaches how to serve the king and parents, so the teacher is respected even by the king. Generally, the way of serving a king is to dedicate one's life to the king, and the way of serving a teacher is the same, dedicating one's life to the teacher. Whatever difficult task he orders, one follows it. So, do as the teacher orders with one mind and sincerity. One mind means not thinking other thoughts, and sincerity means putting in effort without falsehood or deception forever. Do you understand? Yes, the siblings answered in unison. Admirable, that is how it should be. The grandfather stood up, took 2 swords from a chest, and gave them to Asaga and Sasama. The swords were only about 2 feet long, but gold half-moons were inlaid on the Paulownia scabbards. One sword had the Pleiades, Myeongadamal, in silver, and the other had the 7 stars with cords of deerskin. The deerskin had changed color over a long time. "Draw that sword," the grandfather ordered. Asaga and Sasama drew the swords. The blades were bluish and dark. But when lifted into the air, it seemed like a blue rainbow stretched out. The grandfather opened his mouth. "These swords were received as royal gifts by your great-grandfather, General Seorang, for his military merit when following General Isabu to conquer Usan-guk once and Gumgwan-guk another time. General Seorang achieved merit 3 times and received 3 swords, but the sword received for the Battle of Danjam Fortress was carried by your father when he went to war and was lost when he died in Hansanju. If you defeat Goguryeo, you might find your father's sword. That sword is said to be the precious sword used by great King Jinhung, inlaid with a golden half-moon and dragon." After speaking up to here, the grandfather paused and continued, "Your father, Hwarang Jangchun, along with his comrade Hwarang Pa, infiltrated the enemy camp alone at night, beheaded the enemy general, and saved our endangered army. Your father was a loyal general. The enemy was also impressed by that loyalty and bravery, made graves for Jangchun and Pa, and retreated." He told the story of Jangchun. Jangchun and Pa were people who entered the enemy camp alone when the Silla army was surrounded by Bakje forces and in danger of annihilation at the Battle of Hansan, killed the enemy general, and saved the whole army. Later, King Taejong Muyol built Jangwisa, Temple of Grand Righteousness, to pray for their bliss in recognition of their merit. Hearing the story of their father, Asaga and Sasama shuddered once. The grandfather continued, "It was probably that sword that cut off the enemy general's head, the sword engraved with the dragon. Having used that sword cheerfully once, he would have no regrets. Your father used the sword well. He could leap up and cut a flying sparrow. Your great-grandfather was famous for his swordsmanship and always said this: swordsmanship study must reach the point where you can cut whatever you want to cut. He said one is a swordsman only when he can split dust flying in the air. He also said this: a person using a sword must first study cutting his own greed. He said if one can cut one's own throat without hesitation, no enemy can escape that sword. One cuts oneself first before cutting the enemy. If one tries to live oneself and only kill the enemy lives and oneself dies. You will not understand this yet, but you will come to know it as you study. I hear great Master Wonhyo is also a master of swordsmanship. What can a person who has pulled out the root of self not be a master of? Learn the skill to kill 10,000 and save 10,000, and then come find your grandfather. Even if grandfather dies before then, my eyes will be open watching how you become." The grandfather paused and then said, "Do you see the half-moon and stars engraved on that sword? When your heart is true, the moon and stars give power to your sword, but when your heart is false, they do not lend their spirit. It is said when General Yushin placed his sword on the altar and prayed to avenge the country's enemies, starlight extended to the sword blade. Without the help of spirits, even a good sword is no different from a piece of iron. One does not use the sword with skill, but with the power given by spirits. Spirits enjoy a clear and clean mind. When your mind is pure, spirits are in your mind. Great Master Wonhyo will teach you well, but keep this as your grandfather's last instruction. He closed his mouth. Asaga and Sasama engraved the grandfather's words one by one in their hearts. The parental affection emanating from those words shook the souls of the two young people even more powerfully. Go now. At the grandfather's command, Asaga and Sasama stood up and bowed before him. At that moment, fresh tears poured out. Asaga and Sasama dressed as Hwarang. Wearing the swords received from their grandfather and carrying packs, they set out. The grandfather came out the main gate, watched the two walking away, and then went back inside. Asaga and Sasama cried and bowed toward where the grandfather had entered and was no longer visible. At the bend where the house would no longer be visible once turned, Asaga and Sasama looked back. Fire! Asaga screamed in surprise. Flames were rising from the house. Grandfather! The two children prostrated on the ground and cried. The siblings understood their grandfather's intent. It meant now there is no house, so do not think of home. Suppressing the urge to run back to the house, the two respected their grandfather's sincerity and walked away briskly without looking back. Sister. Sasama called his sister after walking for a while. Yes. Grandfather wouldn't have passed away, right? He won't have passed away. How do you know? What about the Gasanga group? Right. Grandfather will go to Gasanga Hall. He will teach people there until the day he passes away. Sasama felt relieved. The day was cloudy but sweltering hot. A heavy shower could pour at any moment.